What if we told you that two completely different music worlds, one born from the streets of America, one rising from the heart of soul, actually speak the same creative language? Hip-hop heads and ARMY might argue all day about who's cooler, but here's the real question. What happens when you line up the biggest names in US rap next to the 7 members of BTS and realize the energy, the artistry, the soul is almost identical? We're not talking about who copied who. We're talking about something deeper, a mirror effect that crosses oceans, cultures, and genres. Which rapper carries the same brooding intensity as the member who writes his pain into poetry? Who matches the effortless charisma of BTS's most magnetic performer? And which hip-hop legend shares a DNA-level connection with the group's wildest creative genius? 7 rappers, 7 members, 0 coincidences. Let's get into it. Number 7. The Quiet Storm, the Deepest Cut. Jin, BTS times Drake. If you think Jin is just the pretty face of BTS, you've been sleeping on one of the most emotionally devastating vocalists of his generation. And Drake, if you think he's just a rapper, you forgot that this man turned heartbreak into a billion-dollar empire. The connection between Jin and Drake isn't immediately obvious on the surface, and that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. You have to dig a little deeper, sit a little longer with both of their catalogs, and then suddenly it hits you like a freight train you never saw coming. Jin, whose full name is Kim Sek-jin, has always occupied a unique space in BTS. He wasn't the main rapper, he wasn't always the loudest voice in the room, but every single time he opened his mouth, something in the air shifted. There's a warmth in his tone that feels almost cinematic, like the background score of a memory you didn't know you were carrying. His solo discography tells a story that most people outside the ARMY bubble have barely scratched the surface of. Awake, released back in 2016 on the Wings album, is arguably one of the most emotionally raw moments in the entire BTS catalog. In that song, Jin confronts something deeply human, the fear of not being good enough, the longing to fly, even when you know your wings might not be strong enough. He sings about watching his members soar and wondering if he'll ever reach that height. That's not idle content. That's a confession. That's the kind of vulnerability that takes real courage to put on a record. And then there's Epiphany, his solo from the Love Yourself Answer album, a theatrical, almost operatic performance where Jin stands in front of a mirror and chooses himself, not in a self-help cliché kind of way, but in a deeply personal, almost painful declaration that he is enough, even with all his flaws. Now flip the record to Drake. Aubrey Graham from Toronto, the kid who started on a teen drama called Degrassi before transforming himself into one of the most commercially dominant forces in the history of hip-hop. On paper, Drake should be the last person you compare to a K-pop idol. But here's what people miss. Drake built his entire brand on the art of emotional honesty wrapped in luxury aesthetics. Marvin's Room, From Time, Look What You've Done. These aren't rap songs in the traditional sense. They are diary entries set to a beat. Drake has never been afraid to cry on a track, to admit he's lonely at the top, to confess that fame didn't fix the emptiness. And that is exactly where he and Jin meet. Both men carry this specific kind of melancholy that lives underneath an undeniably polished exterior. Jin is classically handsome, literally voted one of the most beautiful faces in the world by multiple outlets across multiple years, and Drake is the definition of aspirational cool. But neither of them lets the image be the whole story. Both use their art as a confessional booth, and both have been underestimated because of the lane they operate in. Jin gets dismissed as the visual, the pretty member who's there to look good, the same way Drake spent years being dismissed by hardcore hip-hop purists who said he wasn't real rap because he sang too much and felt too much. The parallel is almost poetic. There's also the layer of humor. Jin is legendary in the BTS universe for his dad jokes, his windshield wiper laugh, his absolutely unhinged comedic timing. And Drake, whether intentionally or not, has become one of the most memeable figures in pop culture. The Hotline Bling video, the Certified Lover Boy album cover, the way he responds to beefs, there's a self-awareness and a playfulness that runs parallel to Jin's personality off stage. Both men understand that being human, being goofy, being real is not a weakness. It's actually the most powerful thing you can offer an audience. And let's talk about resilience, because both of these men have had their moments of public doubt and comeback. Jin enlisted in the South Korean military in December 2022, becoming the first BTS member to fulfill his mandatory service, a moment that shook the army fandom to its core. Before he left, he released The Astronaut, a collaboration with Coldplay that felt like a farewell letter to every person who ever loved him from a distance, a song about being far away but never truly gone. And Drake, on the other hand, survived one of the most brutal rap beefs in recent memory when Kendrick Lamar dropped Not Like Us and the entire internet turned against him in 2024. And yet, Drake is still here, still releasing, still selling out arenas, still relevant. Both men know what it means to have the world question them and choose to keep going anyway. That stubborn, quiet kind of persistence, not aggressive, not defensive, just steady, is the thread that ties Jin and Drake together more than anything else. They are both proof that depth and beauty are not opposites, that a man can be soft and still be powerful, that vulnerability, when delivered with intention and artistry, is the most bulletproof thing in the world. Number 6. The genius nobody saw coming. The mind that never stops. Sugar, BTS versus Kendrick Lamar. If there was ever a pairing in this entire list that feels less like a coincidence and more like the universe deliberately mirroring itself across two different continents, it's this one. Sugar and Kendrick Lamar. Two men who, from the outside, might seem like quiet observers, but the moment you actually sit down with their music, you realize you're not just listening to songs. You're being handed a surgical dissection of the human condition, wrapped in bars so precise and intentional that every single word feels like it was placed there after months of deliberation. This is not casual music. This is not background noise. This is the kind of art that demands your full attention and rewards you with something that changes the way you think. Min Yoongi, known to the world as Suga and to the underground as August D, did not arrive at BTS through the conventional idol pipeline. He came from Daegu, a city in South Korea that sits far from the glamour of Seoul, and he came up grinding in a world that didn't hand him anything. Before the big hit entertainment trainee days, before the sold-out stadiums and the UN speeches, Yoongi was delivering newspapers at 4 in the morning and producing beats in whatever scraps of time he could steal from the day. He slept in a studio the size of a closet. He went hungry. He kept going. And that history, that bone-deep understanding of what it costs to chase something most people around you think is impossible, bleeds into every single track he has ever made. His mixtape, August D, dropped in 2016 as a completely free release, is one of the most brutally honest documents in modern music history. In The Last, Suga opens up about his OCD diagnosis, his depression, his social phobia, topics that in South Korean society, and honestly in most societies, are still wrapped in stigma and silence. He didn't just mention these things in passing. He went into the room, turned on all the lights, and described exactly what he saw. That takes a level of artistic courage that most musicians, regardless of genre or geography, never reach. His follow-up mixtape, D2 in 2020, and then the full studio album D-Day under the August D name in 2023, under the August D name, continued that trajectory. Each project more layered, more sonically adventurous, more emotionally excavating than the last. Now look at Kendrick Lamar. Compton-raised, TDE-built, Pulitzer Prize-winning Kendrick Lamar, the first rapper to ever receive that honor for a non-classical, non-jazz work for his album Damn in 2017. Kendrick didn't just change rap, he forced the entire music industry to reckon with what the art form was capable of. Good Kid, M.A.A.D. City was a cinematic autobiography. To Pimp a Butterfly was a political and psychological manifesto wrapped in jazz and funk. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was a therapy session so raw it made millions of listeners uncomfortable in the best possible way. And through it all, the through line is the same thing you find in Suga's work, an obsessive commitment to truth, to self-examination, to refusing the easy version of the story. Both Suga and Kendrick grew up in environments that shaped them in ways they've never tried to hide or romanticize. Kendrick has spoken extensively about watching violence, poverty, and systemic failure from childhood, and instead of letting it harden him into silence or performance, he let it become the raw material of his art. Suga did the same thing with his Daegu upbringing, his family's financial struggles, the cultural pressure in South Korea around mental health and masculinity. Neither of them turned their pain into a brand gimmick, they turned it into literature. The sonic parallels are just as striking as the personal ones. Suga as a producer, and he is first and foremost a producer, a beatmaker who thinks in architecture, has an ear for tension and release that mirrors the way Kendrick constructs albums. Both men think in full bodies of work, not just singles. Both men layer meaning so densely that listeners are still finding new things on their 10th re-listen. Suga's production on BTS tracks like Cypher Part 3, Interlude Shadow, and his own Daechwita, a jaw-dropping fusion of traditional Korean music and hard rap that broke the internet in 2020, shows a musical intelligence that operates on the same frequency as Kendrick's work with producers like Soundwave and his own hands-on involvement in every sonic decision on his records. There's also the matter of how both men carry themselves in a world that constantly tries to define them by the wrong things. Suga is in a K-pop group, and the industry tends to flatten K-pop into choreography and aesthetics. But Suga has spent his entire career insisting that the music is the point. Kendrick, similarly, has consistently refused to play the celebrity game. No constant features on pop records for a check, no social media performance of his personal life, no compromise of his artistic vision for radio accessibility. Both men have a monk-like dedication to the craft that makes them almost anomalous in their respective industries. And then came 2024, and Kendrick Lamar did something that reminded the entire world exactly who he is. He dismantled Drake in the most clinical, methodical, and culturally seismic rap beef in decades. Not Like Us didn't just win a battle. It became a cultural moment, a #1 hit, a Grammy-winning song, a stadium concert. Kendrick used the beef as a platform to make a broader statement about authenticity, about what hip-hop is supposed to stand for, about the difference between real artistry and manufactured cool. And Suga, who by that point had enlisted in the South Korean military for his mandatory service after releasing D-Day and completing a solo world tour, had already made his own version of that statement years earlier. Every time he chose honesty over optics, every time he sat behind a piano at an award show instead of doing a dance break, every time he looked into a camera and said the things nobody else in his industry was saying. These two men will probably never make music together. The worlds they occupy are separated by language, geography, genre, and industry structure. But in the space where art lives, where the only currency is truth and the only measure is impact, Suga and Kendrick Lamar are speaking the same language, breathing the same fire, and leaving the same kind of mark that doesn't fade when the charts move on. Number 5. The life of the party, the one who makes every room explode. J-Hope, BTS versus Tyler, the Creator. Okay, stop whatever you're doing right now because this pairing, this one is going to make so much sense that you're going to wonder why nobody made this comparison sooner. J-Hope and Tyler, the Creator. At first glance, you might see two incredibly energetic performers who are known for their explosive stage presence and their ability to light up any room they walk into. But the deeper you go, And we are going deep today. The more you realize that this comparison isn't just about energy levels or performance charisma. This is about two artists who fundamentally rewrote the rules of their respective lanes, refused every box the industry tried to put them in, and built creative universes so distinctly their own that the entire culture had no choice but to bow down and acknowledge the genius. Jung Ho-seok, J-Hope, is one of the most criminally underrated artists in the entire BTS ecosystem, and that's saying something in a group where every single member is operating at an elite level. He came into BTS as the main dancer, and for a long time, casual observers filed him under the energetic one, the human sunshine, the mood lifter, the guy who makes you smile just by walking into frame. And yes, all of that is true, but reducing J-Hope to his brightness is like saying the sun is just a light source. You're technically not wrong, but you are catastrophically missing the point, because underneath all that radiance is one of the most disciplined, most artistically ambitious, most creatively restless minds in modern music. His solo mixtape, Hope World, released in 2018, was the first real signal to the world that J-Hope was operating on a completely different frequency than anyone expected. The project was colorful, psychedelic, layered with samples and references that ran from American hip-hop to electronic music to something that felt entirely its own. A sonic world that J-Hope didn't just inhabit, but constructed from the ground up. It debuted at number 38 on the Billboard 200, making him the highest-charting Korean solo artist in history at that point, without a single physical album push in the United States, without a major label machine behind it. Just the music, the vision, and an audience that was ready. Then came Jack in the Box in 2022, and everything changed. This was not the Sunshine album. This was J-Hope taking everything people thought they knew about him, setting it on fire, and dancing in the smoke. The album was dark, aggressive, punk-influenced, lyrically confrontational. It opened with a track called Intro to Pandora's Box and spent the entire runtime dismantling the cheerful persona that had been projected onto him for years. It was his way of saying, I am more than the role you cast me in. I contain multitudes. And the world, finally, was forced to listen. Tyler, the Creator, has been having that exact same conversation with his audience since 2011. Goblin, Wolf, Cherry Bomb, Flower Boy, Igor, Call Me If You Get Lost. Each album a deliberate reinvention. Each era a new visual and sonic universe that Tyler built with obsessive attention to every detail. The album covers, the color palettes, the fashion, the videos, the live show production. Tyler didn't just make music, he made worlds. And the transition from the provocateur of Odd Future, the chaotic, deliberately offensive, shock-value-heavy collective that made the internet lose its mind in the early 2010s, to the Grammy-winning, critically acclaimed fashion icon Tyler of the Igor and Call Me If You Get Lost era, is one of the most remarkable artistic evolutions in recent music history. Igor won the Grammy for Best Rap Album in 2020, and Tyler stood at that podium and delivered an acceptance speech that was itself a piece of performance art, funny, genuine, slightly chaotic, and completely unforgettable. The creative parallels between J-Hope and Tyler run so deep it's almost architectural. Both men are not just musicians, they are total creative directors. J-Hope has been deeply involved in the visual and conceptual direction of his solo work, and his creative input within BTS goes far beyond just his rap and dance contributions. Tyler similarly directs his own music videos, designs his own album artwork, oversees the fashion brand Golf Wong, and controls every pixel of his public creative output. Both men understand that in the modern music landscape, the song is just one layer of the art, and the real statement is made when every element, from the merchandise to the stage design to the Instagram aesthetic, is a coherent extension of the same creative vision. The performance DNA is also impossible to ignore. J-Hope's stage presence is legendary within a group of legendary performers. Watch him in any BTS concert footage and your eyes will find him not just because he's placed at the center, but because there is an electrical current running through every movement he makes, a precision that comes from years of serious dance training, fused with an emotional expressiveness that makes it feel completely spontaneous. Tyler, on stage, is a force of nature, running across the stage, jumping into crowds, screaming his own lyrics back at himself, turning his concerts into genuine communal experiences where the energy between performer and audience becomes something almost physical. Both men make you feel like you are witnessing something that could not have been rehearsed, even when you know, because you've seen the behind-the-scenes footage, that every single moment was thought about, worked on, and refined until it was perfect. There's also a fashion dimension here that cannot be glossed over. Tyler, the Creator, is a legitimate fashion icon. His Golf Wong brand, his collaborations with Converse, his custom suits and color-blocked looks have made him one of the most influential style figures of his generation. J-Hope, for his part, became a global ambassador for Louis Vuitton in 2023, sitting front row at Paris Fashion Week, appearing on the covers of international fashion magazines, and bringing a Korean artist's presence to the highest levels of the Western luxury fashion world. Both men treat fashion not as a red carpet obligation, but as a genuine extension of their artistic identity, another canvas, another language, another way of saying something true about who they are and what they see when they look at the world. And perhaps the most important parallel of all, both J-Hope and Tyler have spent their careers actively expanding what their respective genres are allowed to be. Tyler pushed rap into jazz, into soul, into something that resisted every genre label while still feeling unmistakably hip-hop at its core. J-Hope pushed K-pop into punk, into alternative, into emotional darkness, proving that the genre was not a ceiling, but a launching pad. Both men took the genre that made them and made it bigger, stranger, more honest, and more free. That is not a coincidence. That is the signature of a certain kind of genius, one that doesn't just work within the culture, but permanently expands it. Number 4. The smooth operator, the one who makes cool look effortless. BTS versus J. Cole. Alright, let's take a breath here, because this pairing right here, this is the one that the real ones already knew was coming. RM and J. Cole, the intellectuals, the philosophers, the ones who walked into an industry built on spectacle and said quietly but firmly that the words are going to matter here, that the craft is going to matter here, that we are not just going to give you something to dance to, we are going to give you something to think about. Something to sit with at 2 in the morning when the noise dies down and you're left alone with the questions you've been avoiding all day. If Suga and Kendrick are the surgical truth tellers, then RM and J. Cole are the architects, the men who build cathedrals out of language and then invite you to walk through them at your own pace, discovering new things every time you visit. Kim Namjoon, RM, is the leader of BTS, and that title carries more weight than most people outside the fandom fully understand. He is not a figurehead leader. He is not a ceremonial captain. He is the intellectual and creative anchor of one of the most complex artistic operations in modern music history. RM was the first member of BTS to become fluent in English, and he did it largely by watching the television show Friends on repeat, a detail that has become almost legendary in BTS lore, but that also tells you something fundamental about who he is. He is someone who taught himself an entirely new language because he needed it, because the world he wanted to access required it, because he was not willing to let a barrier stay a barrier. That same relentless intellectual hunger runs through everything he does. His solo work is a masterclass in what happens when genuine philosophical curiosity meets genuine musical talent. His first solo album, Indigo, released in 2022, was described by RM himself as a documentation of his late 20s, a record he made to preserve who he was at that specific moment before adulthood fully consumed him. It featured collaborations with Erykah Badu, with Anderson .Paak, with Mahalia, with Paul Autumn, artists from completely different corners of the musical world, and somehow RM wove them all into a coherent, emotional statement about identity, time, and the terrifying beauty of change. The album didn't chase trends, it didn't perform vulnerability. It was vulnerable in the way that only happens when an artist has done enough internal work to stop being afraid of what they might find. His follow-up, Right Place, Wrong Person in 2024, pushed even further into that territory. Restless, genre-fluid, packed with the kind of lyrical density that rewards repeated listening the way a great novel rewards rereading. Now enter Jermaine Lamar Cole, J. Cole, from Fayetteville, North Carolina, a man who built one of the most devoted fan bases in hip-hop history almost entirely on the strength of his lyricism and his reputation for integrity. J. Cole is the rapper that other rappers cite when they talk about who they look up to. He is the benchmark for a certain kind of seriousness in hip-hop, the idea that you can be commercially successful without compromising your artistic vision, that you can fill stadiums without making music that panders to the lowest common denominator, that you can talk about real things, systemic racism, mental health, the complexity of black masculinity, the weight of ambition and its cost, and still connect with millions of people across every demographic. His catalog is a document of sustained artistic integrity that has almost no parallel in contemporary rap. From the early mixtape days of The Warm Up and Friday Night Lights through the studio albums Cole World, Born Sinner, 2014 Forest Hills Drive, which he produced entirely himself, and which went platinum with 0 features, a statement so bold it became a piece of hip-hop mythology. Through KOD, The Off Season, and It's a Boy, J. Cole has never stopped growing, never stopped interrogating himself, never asking the hard questions both in his music and about his music. The intellectual parallels between RM and J. Cole are so precise they feel almost engineered. Both men are voracious readers. RM is famously passionate about literature and visual art, regularly visiting museums and galleries around the world, and sharing his reading list with fans in a way that has genuinely introduced millions of young people to books and artists they would never have encountered otherwise. J. Cole similarly has spoken extensively about his love of reading, about the writers and thinkers who shaped his worldview, about the way literature taught him to think about storytelling in ways that pure hip-hop study never could have. Both men approach their music the way a writer approaches a manuscript, with patience, with revision, with a willingness to throw out what doesn't serve the larger truth, even if it's technically impressive. There is also the matter of leadership and responsibility, because both RM and J. Cole carry their platforms with a weight and a conscientiousness that sets them apart from their peers. RM has used BTS's global megaphone to speak at the United Nations twice, delivering speeches about self-love, mental health, and the power of young people to define their own narratives that were not performances or PR moves, but genuine expressions of a worldview he has been developing his entire life. J. Cole, through his Dreamville Records and Foundation, has invested in his community, mentored younger artists, built infrastructure for the next generation of hip-hop creators, and consistently used his platform to push back against the parts of rap culture that he believes are doing more harm than good. The 2021 track Heaven's EP and his various interviews and essays show a man who thinks about his legacy, his responsibility, and his relationship to the culture with the same rigor that RM brings to his own public role as the face and voice of BTS. And let's talk about the creative restlessness, because this is perhaps the most defining quality both men share. RM has never made the same album twice. He has never settled into a formula, never let commercial success become a creative comfort zone. Every project is a departure, a risk, a genuine attempt to capture something new and true about where he is right now. J. Cole similarly has consistently refused to be the artist people thought he was. Just when the hip-hop world thought they had him figured out as the lyrical purist in the lane between Kendrick and Drake, he dropped surprise projects, took unexpected features, announced retirements from rap, and then returned with music that made the whole conversation feel premature and reductive. Both men are too curious, too restless, too genuinely in love with the act of creation to ever fully arrive at a final version of themselves. That ongoing becoming, that refusal to calcify into an icon when there is still so much more to explore, is the deepest, truest thing that RM and J. Cole share, and it is the reason both of them will still be making essential music long after everyone who underestimated them has run out of things to say. Number 3. The Shapeshifter, the one who becomes whatever the song needs. Jimin, BTS versus Frank Ocean. Breathe. Just breathe for a second, because this pairing, this specific pairing right here, is the one that's going to hit different. This is the one that's going to make you go back and listen to both of their catalogs with completely new ears. Jimin and Frank Ocean, two artists who exist in a category so singular, so specific, so unrepeatable that the music industry genuinely doesn't have the right vocabulary to describe what they do. Critics keep trying. They reach for words like ethereal and transcendent and otherworldly, and those words aren't wrong, but they're not enough either. Because what Jimin and Frank Ocean both do goes beyond technical description. It lives in the body. It lives in the chest. It's the feeling you get when a piece of music reaches past every defense you've built and touches something so private, so buried, so carefully protected that you didn't even know it was still there until the song found it. That is not a common gift. That is not something you can manufacture or train into existence. That is something you are born carrying, and the only question is whether you're brave enough to use it. Park Jimin is, by any objective measure, one of the most complete performing artists of his generation. He trained in contemporary dance before joining big hit entertainment, and that foundation, that understanding of the body as a storytelling instrument, is visible in literally everything he does. When Jimin performs, there is no separation between the music and the movement, between the emotion and the physicality. It is all one continuous expression, like watching someone think out loud in a language that exists entirely in the space between sound and silence. His vocal style is unlike anything else in K-pop, breathy, fragile in texture, but devastatingly precise in placement, capable of moving from a whisper that feels like a secret to a note that splits you open without warning. His solo work has been a slow, deliberate revelation of exactly how deep that artistry goes. Lie, his solo from the Wings album in 2016, was a masterpiece of tension and release, a song that felt like a fever dream choreographed with a contemporary dance sequence that left audiences genuinely shaken. Serendipity was pure tenderness, a pocket of warmth so intimate it felt almost intrusive to listen to. But it was his debut solo album, Face, in 2023, and particularly the single Like Crazy, that announced to the world in absolutely unambiguous terms that Jimin was not operating inside any existing box. Like Crazy debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making Jimin the first Korean solo artist in history to achieve that, and the song itself was a hypnotic, slightly psychedelic piece of alternative pop that felt like it was recorded inside a dream about something you've already lost. It was disorienting in the best possible way. It made you feel things you couldn't name. And then came Muse in 2024, his second solo album, which pushed even further into that artistic space where genre becomes irrelevant and pure feeling takes over completely. Now close your eyes and think about Frank Ocean. Christopher Edwin Bro from Long Beach, California, a man who spent years writing songs for other people before the world realized that the most extraordinary songs were the ones he was keeping for himself. Channel Orange in 2012 didn't just arrive, it detonated. It changed the conversation about what R&B was allowed to be, what male vulnerability was allowed to sound like, what a love song could contain when the artist refused to perform happiness they didn't feel. The album was praised by literally everyone, musicians, critics, writers, cultural theorists, as a generational statement, a document that would outlast every trend that was current at the moment of its release. And then came Blonde in 2016, and Frank Ocean did something even more radical. He made an album so interior, so deliberately resistant to easy consumption, so committed to emotional texture over conventional structure, that it essentially defied the music industry's entire framework for what a successful album release was supposed to look like. No features designed for radio, no singles engineered for streaming algorithms, just Frank, alone in a sonic space he had built entirely to his own specifications, inviting you in on his terms. It went number one anyway, because when the art is true enough, the audience finds it. The vocal parallels between Jimin and Frank Ocean are the kind of thing that music theorists could write dissertations about. Both singers operate in a register that feels almost conversational, intimate in a way that makes you feel like they're singing specifically to you, not to a room, not to a demographic, not to a streaming platform. Both use silence and space as deliberately as they use sound, knowing when to pull back, when to let the breath in the voice carry more weight than any note could. Both possess a quality that is almost impossible to teach and nearly impossible to describe accurately, a kind of emotional transparency in the voice, where you don't just hear Jimin, you feel what he feels. You don't just hear Frank Ocean, you inhabit what he's describing. That is a level of artistic transmission that almost nobody achieves, and both of these men have it in abundance. There is also the shared relationship with queerness, identity, and the courage to exist authentically in industries and cultures that have historically demanded conformity. Frank Ocean's open letter in 2012, posted to Tumblr before the release of Channel Orange, in which he described falling in love with a man for the first time, was a seismic cultural moment, not just for R&B, not just for hip-hop, but for popular music broadly. He did it quietly, without a press conference, without a carefully managed rollout, just the truth placed into the world and left to land where it would. Jimin, operating in the South Korean entertainment industry where the personal lives of idols are subject to intense scrutiny and where the cultural conversation about gender and sexuality is still navigating enormous complexity, has spent his career quietly but consistently pushing against the rigid masculinity norms of both K-pop and Korean society more broadly, through his fashion choices, his performance style, his willingness to embody softness and sensuality and emotional openness in ways that challenge every expectation placed on a male idol. Both men have used their art as a space to be more fully themselves than the culture around them might have made comfortable, and both have been met with a devotion from their audiences that suggests the world was far more ready for that honesty than the gatekeepers ever believed. The mystery is also a shared frequency. Frank Ocean is one of the most mythologized figures in contemporary music precisely because he guards his private self so carefully. He releases music on his own timeline. He disappears for years. He gives almost no interviews. He lets the work speak while the man behind it remains deliberately obscured. Jimin, while existing in the hyper-documented world of K-pop, where fan culture creates an unprecedented intimacy between artist and audience, has always maintained a core interior self that feels genuinely private, a depth that the cameras and the fan cams and the vlogs never quite reach. Both men give you everything in the music and just enough of themselves outside it to keep you perpetually beautifully on the edge of understanding. That tension between total artistic openness and personal mystery is part of what makes both of them so utterly compelling, so impossible to stop thinking about, so permanent in the cultural conversation, regardless of what the charts are doing on any given week. Number 2. The electric current, the one that camera can't chase. Hold on right there, because we just entered the top 2, and if you thought the previous pairings were going to prepare you for this, they didn't. Nothing prepares you for this. Jungkook and The Weeknd, the Golden Maknae and Abel Tesfaye. Two names that, the moment you place them side by side, produce a recognition so immediate, so visceral, so undeniable that it feels less like a comparison and more like a revelation that was always sitting there waiting for you to arrive at it. These are not just two successful artists operating in vaguely similar aesthetic spaces. These are two men who have each, independently and through completely different journeys, arrived at the same rare destination, a place where talent is so total, so all-encompassing, so effortlessly expressed that the audience stops thinking about the craft and starts just experiencing the thing itself. That is the rarest place in music. Very few people ever get there. Jungkook and The Weeknd both live there permanently, and the address is somewhere most artists spend their entire careers trying to find. Jungkook was 15 years old when he auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment. 15. And the story goes, and this is not mythology, this is documented history, that he was being courted by multiple major agencies at the same time. Agencies that saw in this teenager from Busan something so obviously extraordinary that they were competing for the right to develop it. He chose Big Hit. He chose what would become BTS. And what followed is one of the most remarkable individual artistic developments in the history of modern pop music. A teenager who came in as a promising trainee and over the course of a decade transformed himself into one of the most complete, most versatile, most genuinely gifted performers on the planet. The thing about Jungkook that separates him even within BTS, a group where the baseline level of talent is already stratospheric, is the totality of his ability. He can sing with a power and a precision that puts him in conversation with the greatest vocalists of his generation. He can rap with enough technical facility and enough genuine feel that he holds his own on tracks alongside members who rap as their primary function. He can dance at a level that would make him the standout performer in literally any other group on earth. He produces, he writes, he plays instruments, he directs his own creative visual content, and he does it all with a naturalness, a lack of visible effort that is either the product of the most disciplined work ethic imaginable, which it is because the behind-the-scenes footage and the trainee testimonials make that crystal clear, or genuine supernatural gifting. In his case, it's both. His solo debut album, Golden, in 2023, was a statement of exactly that totality, a pop record that moved through genres and moods with the confidence of someone who has complete command of every room he walks into. 7, the lead single featuring Lotto, became one of the biggest songs of 2023, spending weeks at the top of the Billboard Hot 100 and becoming the fastest song in Spotify history to reach 100 million streams. But beyond the numbers, beyond the records, what Golden demonstrated was that Jungkook's artistic identity is fully formed and fully his own. A voice, a sensibility, a way of inhabiting a song that is instantly recognizable and impossible to replicate. Now, Abel Tesfaye, The Weeknd, Toronto, Canada, a man who uploaded 3 songs to YouTube in 2010 with no name, no face, no press release, just the music, deliberately obscured, deliberately mysterious, and within weeks had Drake blogging about him, had the internet in a frenzy trying to figure out who this person was and where this sound had come from. Because the sound was unlike anything that existed. It was R&B, but it was also something else entirely. Dark, cinematic, drenched in a specific kind of nocturnal atmosphere that felt like the soundtrack to a life being lived at the absolute edge of pleasure and consequence. Trilogy, the compilation of those early mixtapes, is still one of the most influential bodies of work in modern R&B history. It essentially created a sonic template that half the music industry has spent the last decade trying to replicate, and nobody has managed to duplicate. Then came Kissland, then Beauty Behind the Madness, which produced Can't Feel My Face and The Hills, and made The Weeknd a genuine mainstream superstar without sacrificing a single molecule of the darkness that made him essential. Starboy, After Hours, Dawn FM, each album a cinematic universe, each era a complete aesthetic reinvention, each project proof that Abel Tesfaye is not just making music, but constructing an ongoing artistic mythology that will be studied and referenced for decades. The vocal comparison between Jungkook and The Weeknd is the most immediate and obvious point of connection, and it is genuinely extraordinary how similar their vocal DNA is when you actually listen analytically. Both singers operate in a falsetto-adjacent upper register that manages to be simultaneously powerful and fragile, a combination that should be technically contradictory, but in both of their voices produces something that feels completely inevitable. Both have a way of bending notes, of sitting slightly behind or ahead of the beat in a way that creates an intimacy, a sense of improvisation, even in meticulously produced studio recordings. Both voices carry a specific emotional color, something melancholy, something searching, something that suggests depth of feeling, even in moments of apparent joy or celebration, that is entirely their own, and no amount of technical training can manufacture in a voice that doesn't already contain it. You either have that quality or you don't. Jungkook has it. The Weeknd has it, and it is one of the primary reasons both men connect with audiences on a level that transcends language, culture, and genre. The aesthetic parallels run just as deep. The Weeknd has built one of the most visually distinctive artistic identities in contemporary music, the red suit era of After Hours, the bandaged face of the AMA performances, the retro-futurist visual language of Dawn FM with its fictional radio station concept and its 1980s sonic palette, and every element of every era is controlled, considered, and deliberate. Jungkook, similarly, has developed a visual and aesthetic identity that is instantly recognizable. The tattoos that gradually appeared on his hands and arms and became a kind of personal map of his journey. The fashion sensibility that moves between streetwear and high fashion with complete ease. The way he photographs with an almost magnetic quality that makes every image feel like it was composed rather than captured. Both men are what the fashion and creative industries call a muse, not just people who wear clothes or appear in images, but figures whose very presence transforms the visual context around them. There is also the dimension of cultural crossover and what both men represent in terms of breaking down the walls between previously segregated audiences. The Weeknd achieved something that almost nobody in R&B had managed at that scale. He became a genuine rock-era level stadium artist, selling out venues that had historically been the domain of guitar bands and legacy pop acts, building a live show production that matched anything in the concert industry for scale and ambition. His Super Bowl halftime performance in 2021, staged entirely with dancers whose faces were bandaged to match his own, a surreal and visually stunning piece of performance art broadcast to over 96 million viewers, is already being discussed as one of the greatest halftime shows in the history of the event. Jungkook performed at the 2022 FIFA World Cup opening ceremony in Qatar, singing Dreamers in front of a global live audience of over 1 billion people, becoming the first Korean artist to perform at a World Cup, carrying an entire nation's cultural pride on his shoulders and delivering a performance so controlled and so emotionally present that it became one of the defining cultural moments of that year. Both men have stood on the biggest stages the world offers, and not just held their own, but expanded what those stages were capable of containing. And perhaps what ties all of this together most profoundly is the shared quality of mystery. The sense that no matter how much both men give you, no matter how many records they release or stages they command or interviews they occasionally grant, there is always more beneath the surface. The Weeknd guards his private self with an almost architectural intentionality. Everything you know about Abel Tesfaye is what he has chosen to put into the work, and the work contains multitudes without ever fully resolving into a simple story. Jungkook, despite growing up almost entirely in public, joining BTS at 15, spending his entire adolescence and young adulthood under the most intense fan and media scrutiny imaginable, has maintained a genuine interiority, a private self that the cameras have never fully reached. Both men give you everything and keep something. Both men make you feel like you know them completely and remind you, quietly but unmistakably, that you don't. That tension is not accidental. It is the engine of their magnetism, the source of their enduring fascination, and the reason that both Jungkook and The Weeknd will still be the most compelling names in any room they enter, long after every trend that surrounds them has faded into irrelevance. Number 1. The universe in a person, the one who was born to own every stage he touches. BTS versus Kanye West. We saved this one for last, and if you've been with us through every single entry on this list, through the emotional depth of Jin and Drake, through the surgical brilliance of Suga and Kendrick, through the explosive creativity of J-Hope and Tyler, through the intellectual architecture of RM and J. Cole, through the ethereal intimacy of Jimin and Frank Ocean, through the total magnetism of Jungkook and The Weeknd, then you already know that whatever sits at number 1 has to be something different, something bigger, something that doesn't just complete the list, but reframes everything that came before it. And that is exactly what V and Kanye West do. This is not the most obvious pairing on this list. It is not the one that announces itself immediately with a clean, simple parallel that anyone can see from a distance. This is the one that requires you to sit with it, to turn it over, to look at it from multiple angles. And then, when it finally clicks, it clicks so completely, so permanently, so undeniably that you cannot imagine having ever seen these two artists as separate phenomena, rather than two expressions of the same fundamental artistic force. Kim Tae-young, V, is the most singular human being in the entire BTS universe, and that is an extraordinary statement to make about a man who exists alongside 6 other extraordinary human beings. From the very beginning, even before the world fully understood what it was looking at, there was something about V that operated on a different frequency. Not better than his members, that is not the point, and it was never the point, but different in a way that was almost metaphysical, like the universe decided to concentrate a specific kind of rare, unrepeatable creative energy into one person, and then set that person loose in the world and waited to see what would happen. What happened was one of the most fascinating artistic journeys in modern music history. V came into BTS as the secret member. He was kept hidden during the pre-debut period, not revealed to the public until the very last moment, and when he finally appeared, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. There was a quality to him that cameras couldn't fully capture and descriptions couldn't fully contain, a presence, a depth, an otherness that made people stop and look twice and then keep looking. His visual impact is legendary and well documented. He has been called the most beautiful man in the world by more outlets and surveys and cultural commentators than any other person in his generation. And while beauty is always subjective, the consistency of that response across cultures, demographics, and aesthetic traditions suggests something beyond conventional handsomeness. There is a quality to V's face and his bearing that feels almost archetypal, like he was assembled from the collective human imagination of what a certain kind of beauty should look like. But to focus on the visual is to make the same mistake that people have been making about V since 2013, which is to see the surface and miss the substance. Because V, as an artist, as a musician, as a creative mind, as a builder of aesthetic worlds, is operating at a level of originality and intention that demands to be taken completely seriously on its own terms. His solo debut album, Layover, in 2023, was unlike anything in the K-pop landscape, a jazz and soul-influenced collection of songs that felt like they had been pulled from a different era entirely, intimate and warm and unhurried in a way that suggested complete indifference to whatever the current trend cycle was doing. It wasn't engineered for streaming algorithms. It wasn't designed to maximize first-week numbers. It was made because V had something specific he wanted to say and a specific sonic world he wanted to build to say it in, and commercial considerations were simply not the primary variable in that equation. Grandiose, released in 2024, continued that trajectory with even more confidence, V deepening his artistic identity, refining the aesthetic universe he was constructing, proving that Layover was not a moment of inspiration, but the beginning of a sustained artistic vision that was going to keep developing and surprising people for as long as he chose to pursue it. His fashion presence is its own phenomenon. V became a global ambassador for Celine under the creative direction of Hedi Slimane, a relationship that felt almost fated given that Slimane's entire aesthetic philosophy centers on a certain kind of romantic, slightly melancholic, deeply considered coolness that V embodies more completely than almost any other figure in contemporary culture. The photographs from their collaborations together are some of the most striking images in recent fashion history, not because V is simply a beautiful person wearing beautiful clothes, but because there is an intelligence and an intentionality in his relationship to image making that elevates every frame he appears in. Now, Kanye West, Ye, the most complicated, the most contradictory, the most genuinely visionary and genuinely destructive artist of his generation, a man whose biography reads like a Greek tragedy written by someone who loved hip-hop so much, they decided to use it as the vehicle for the most ambitious, most reckless, most breathtaking artistic experiment of the 21st century. Whatever your feelings about Kanye West as a person, and those feelings are valid and complicated, and the full weight of his public behavior and statements in recent years cannot and should not be minimized, the artistic legacy of the first 2 decades of his career represents a body of work that changed music so fundamentally and so permanently that the industry can be divided in before Kanye and after Kanye in ways that are not hyperbole, but simple, documentable facts. The college dropout in 2004 arrived and immediately dismantled every assumption about what a rapper was supposed to be and sound like and talk about. Late registration expanded that blueprint with orchestral ambition that had no precedent in hip-hop. Graduation fused stadium rock energy with electronic music and rap in a way that rewrote the rules of what a hip-hop concert could be. 808s and Heartbreak, released in 2008 after the death of his mother Donda and the end of a significant relationship, was so far ahead of its time that it essentially predicted the entire emotional landscape of popular music for the following decade, pioneering the auto-tune as emotional instrument approach that would go on to define the sound of an era. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in 2010 is still regularly cited as one of the greatest albums ever made in any genre, a maximalist, baroque, endlessly layered meditation on fame, ego, desire, and self-destruction that somehow managed to be both a confession and a monument simultaneously. And then Yeezus, and then The Life of Pablo, and then Ye. Each record a reinvention so complete it felt less like an artistic evolution and more like a series of entirely different artists sharing the same name and the same pathological need to make something that had never existed before. The connection between V and Kanye West is not primarily sonic. Their music doesn't sound alike in any direct way, and that is actually part of what makes the parallel so interesting and so true. The connection is deeper than sound. It lives in the quality of their creative vision, in the totality of their aesthetic ambition, in the way both men approach art not as a product to be manufactured, but as a world to be built, a complete, immersive, internally consistent universe with its own rules, its own visual language, its own emotional atmosphere, its own relationship to time and beauty and feeling. Both men are what you might call total artists in the most complete sense of that phrase. Men for whom the song is just the element of a larger creative statement that encompasses fashion, visual art, architecture, film, and the ongoing construction of a public artistic persona that is itself a kind of artwork. Kanye's Yeezy fashion line didn't just produce clothes, it produced a visual philosophy that influenced the entire fashion industry. His album rollouts, the listening parties and stadiums, the floating stage, the Sunday service performances were not promotional events, but genuine artistic happenings, extensions of the music into physical and communal space. V's approach to his own artistic identity carries the same totalizing ambition. Every visual, every fashion choice, every interview, every social media post is part of a coherent aesthetic statement that he is clearly curating with extraordinary intentionality. Both men are also defined by a quality that is almost impossible to articulate, but immediately recognizable when you encounter it. A quality that the French might call je ne sais quoi, and the rest of us might simply call magic. There is something about both V and Kanye that exists outside the normal parameters of talent and training and hard work. Both men have done the work. No serious examination of either artist's career supports the idea that what they do is accidental or effortless. But there is something in the work that exceeds the work, something that arrives through them rather than from them, something that suggests they are connected to a creative source that operates beyond the ordinary mechanics of artistic production. Watch V perform Singularity, his solo from the Love Yourself Tear album, a theatrical, cinematic piece of performance art that requires him to embody an entirely different emotional and physical register from anything else he does in the BTS catalog. Watch Kanye perform Runaway live at the 2010 VMAs with a full orchestra in a white tuxedo, the most beautiful and the most damaged version of himself simultaneously visible in every moment. You will see exactly. So, where does that leave us? We've traveled from the confessional depths of Drake and Jin to the architectural brilliance of RM and J. Cole. We've witnessed the genre-bending madness of J-Hope and Tyler the Creator, and sat in the ethereal storms of Jimin and Frank Ocean. We've dissected the precision of Suga and Kendrick, surrendered to the magnetism of Jungkook and The Weeknd, and stood in awe of the world-building madness of V and Kanye West. 7 members, 7 legends, 7 mirrors held up across oceans and cultures, proving that true artistry doesn't care about borders. When you strip away the industry labels, the chart battles, and the fan wars, what you are left with is the beating heart of creation. Hip-hop was born as a powerful voice for the voiceless. BTS was born in a cramped Seoul studio, carrying the heavy weight of a generation just wanting to be heard. The aesthetics might differ, the languages might require translation, but the soul is completely identical. This isn't about comparing vocal tones or fashion, it's about recognizing that the blueprint for greatness is universal. The ultimate goal is exactly the same, to make the audience feel something so deeply that they forget they are just listening to a track. Now the mic is officially passed to you. Did we miss a connection? Who shares a sonic soul with your bias? Drop your wildest, most heavily analyzed pairings down in the comments. Argue your case. Let's turn this comment section into the most intelligent music debate on the internet today. If this breakdown shifted your perspective, if it made you want to put Golden and Starboy on the exact same playlist, hit that like button. Share this video with that friend who still thinks K-pop and hip-hop exist in totally different universes. Prove them wrong. Here on Young Cook News, we don't just scratch the surface, we dissect the culture, the artistry, and the untold stories behind the biggest names on the planet. Make sure you smash that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next massive deep dive. Keep listening closely, keep thinking deeply, and never let anyone put your playlist in a box. We will see you in the next one.